Here's another tip for you guys. You can use Vaseline to keep... I hope that you're watching. Don't try to stop this. Work until I'm nauseous, 'cause I will not quit. Today I'm going to share with you guys some gar fishing tips and techniques that I've picked up over time that will hopefully help you catch more gar. Now today I'm going to be fishing for spotted and shortnose and longnose gar, but these principles apply to alligator gar as well. You just have to scale it on a different size, and you have to take what I talk about in this video and apply it to where it applies to you. So every situation's different, the land, the layout, the fishery's different, those fish act different. So the first thing you want to do if you're gonna go gar fishing is you gotta find somewhere where gar's at. Gar in lakes, they're in rivers. I mean, they're pretty much all over the place, especially in like Texas, Florida, Georgia. So a good way to find out where the gar are at is to go out in the middle of the day. Whenever it's hot like it is right now, those gar will go to the deep holes in the river. Now, a lot of times they will also populate in deep holes in the lakes as well. But the point is, whenever it gets hot like this, those gar have got an air bladder. So whenever it's hot and the oxygen levels get low in the water, those gar will come up and they'll grab air and put in their air bladder, and you'll see little bubbles come down. So it looks different than when they're feeding, but if you go out in the middle of the day when it's super hot in like the middle of the dog days, June, July, and you just look and you be real quiet, you can see if there's gar in that hole. You'll see them coming up to the top of the water and grabbing air. But I'm gonna go over with you guys my setup real quick that I'm using. This is a PC Fun Phantom reel, so it's a super light reel. Gear ratio really isn't important here. I don't want something super slow, but it's like a 701. It works. And then this rod is a 7.4 medium heavy with a moderate fast tip. The rod's stiff enough to pull in that big fish, but it's got that softer tip on it, so it will flex and I can wiggle that fish out of the cover good. Now my hook, you guys see, is a tiny little octopus hook. Now this little hook's very important to my success in catching these gar and mudfish too, because it's so small wire, and those fish have a very bony mouth, especially longnose gar. They got a beak about this long, and trying to get a big stilp, like a big thick hook in there, it's really hard to do. And a lot of times they'll have it right in the tip of their beak, and you won't get that hook in there and you'll miss them. So I've found with using this smaller hook that I get the hook in there better. And the reason that I'm using monofilament is because monofilament floats, and I can throw it out there with no cork and that bait will sink directly down while my monofilament is on top of the water still. So with fluorocarbon, that fluorocarbon would sink to the bottom and it will be getting hung up on all the junk and trash down there. You can use Vaseline to keep your line afloat on top of the water. If you're not using a cork, take a little bit of that Vaseline, you just take it and just kind of rub it on your line there, just like that. And what that's going to do is make that line float. Now, I don't like to get it all the way down to my hook. I just normally like to run it up probably about 10-20 foot up my line, depending on how far out I'm fishing, but that will keep that line afloat. All right, so now I've covered exactly my setup and what I'm using. Let's talk about bait for a minute. If you just want to catch any kind of gar, just use a small piece of cut bait. That's going to catch gar. But right now what I'm trying to do is catch me like a 4.5 foot longnose gar. And generally if I put on a small piece of cut bait, I'm going to catch more mudfish, I'm going to catch smaller spotted gar, I'm going to catch smaller shortnose gar. When I use live bait like that, hand size about like this, I normally catch the bigger longnose gar. And it takes a lot longer to get a bite because you just got to have it out there whenever he swims by. But I'm going for Big Daddy. I don't know about you guys. Sometimes I'll get bored and I like catching a couple small fish, but right now I want a big girl. So let me go get my bait real quick and I'll show you guys. All right, so this is what I'm using for bait. This is a small shell cracker you guys can see here. Just about hand size, palm size there. To start out with, I'm gonna hook this fish in the back. I'm gonna hook him right there. And I don't want it too deep. I want it shallow because I want to be able to pull it out into that gar's mouth. So when the long nose gar grabs it, he's going to grab it in the middle most of the time like that. And he's going to sit there, he's going to run, he's going to chew on it, and then eventually he's going to turn it sideways and swallow it. So sometimes hooking him in the back like that, if you do a premature hook set, you can get that hook in the middle of their beak. Sometimes it's really hard to tell if they've actually swallowed it or not. Sometimes they'll make 3 or 4 runs and haven't even swallowed the bait yet. Now let's talk about corks and not using corks. A lot of people like to use corks. I'm not adverse to using corks, but for me it just depends on how finicky the gar are acting, if they're up on top of the water, if they're down, down deep. So right now, with it being later in the day, they probably are going to be up more towards the top of the water column. But with me hooking this fish in the back like that, you see how he dangles that way? Whenever I throw him out there, he is going to swim away from this hook. So the line is going to be like that, and he's going to be trying to go away from whatever direction you're pulling him. Now on the other hand, if I were to hook him in the mouth, he's going to follow that direction where that hook's at and likely just kind of sink down. Now I do like to hook them in the mouth if I'm cork fishing. Sometimes I hook them in the back too. It also depends on how much current you have. So if I'm in a place with a lot of current and I'm throwing downstream, I'll hook that bait fish right in the mouth with a cork. That way he's going with the current. You hook him in the back and there's a lot of current, then he's just gonna kind of float up on the side, and I don't want that. I want him to swim around. So first I'm gonna drop him in the water a little bit before I throw him out, let him revive. You guys see here, just kind of wiggling him around. I think I held him a little bit too long. He looks a little dead. I like to give him a second after I get the hook in them to revive before I throw them out, because depending on how they hit the water, you can stun them even worse and ultimately kill them. Which gar will eat dead bait? I mean, gar and mudfish are both bottom feeders. They're scavengers. They eat dead stuff off the bottom all the time. But these big gar, the big ones like I'm talking about, they really like live bait. Usually whenever I get to a gar hole, it's easy to get bites and catch the first one. I can use a steel leader, catch that first fish, but after I hook that first one, it seems like it gets really hard to catch the next one. It's like they go back and tell all their buddies. That's where the principles really apply to using like monofilament. Now I'm gonna start off with a cork because I see these gar up on top of the water, but if they weren't coming up to the top of the water right now, I would start out fishing without a cork and just throw it out and let my brim swim around. Also, if I was in a kayak, what I like to do is get right in the middle of the hole and not even throw out and just feed my line out and let that brim swim naturally under me where I know those fish are at, where I know the gar are at, until the gar come and get him. Now with it hot, it's really hard to keep the bait fish alive. If I see my bait fish moving around a lot, I like to give it like a little jerk, and that cork will pop and it'll make some noise and it will attract those gar. You know, the fish will hear that and think it's fish feeding, and they'll come up to check it out, and then they'll see that bait fish swimming around and they'll get him. Sometimes when I pulled up, I was making a bunch of noise coming in here. I didn't see a whole bunch of gar moving around, didn't see a whole bunch of activity, but whenever I sat here get my camera gear ready, being real quiet, I started seeing them come up. So one tip that I'm going to give you guys, if it's in the middle of the day, the fish aren't feeding, they're not active, it's hot like this, they can be spooky. So be very quiet, try to be stealthy, try to be as quiet as you can and as still as possible. So I've seen several gar come up either right next to my bait and check it out, and I had 2 that actually grabbed my bait. I could tell because the cork went under a little bit and then he let go of it. So they're really finicky right now. And you guys see I've got 15-pound line on here, 15-pound mono, and I've got a cork keeping up on top of the water. So since they're so finicky, what I'm going to do is take the cork off. I'm going to downsize my bait. The bait's already dead anyway, so I'm going to go ahead and chop them into a little chunk here. Alright, I got me a nice little bite-sized chunk, so I'm going to take this tiny little hook. I'm going to hook it right in the corner of this chunk, somewhere where it will come out of easily, but it will go in there and stay in there. So what I did there, I hooked it right near that piece of bone. It's not going to come out of that bone, but I don't have a whole lot of meat, so that hook is still going to be able to have room to go in that gar's mouth. So if you hook it really deep in the meat, then you're going to have to pull it out of that meat to get in that gar's mouth. Guys, I do keep seeing the gar come up on top of the water to get air down every now and then, but they're not really staying on top of the water. Now later in the day, a lot of times, you'll see them come up on top of the water once there's shade over the whole river, or the sun starts going down behind the trees. You'll see them coming up and actually chasing bait and feeding. And that's probably the best time to actually fish for them, especially with a cork. Whenever they're feeding, they're already in that feeding mode. You just throw some bait in front of them, and pretty easy to catch then. In the middle of the day like this, if they're not feeding, like it seems they're not now, kind of got to finesse them, which is what I'm doing. That felt like a bite, kind of. Oh, that was a bite. That was a bite. All right, so I got a bite, guys. Now what I'm going to do is let him run, because that is probably a longnose gar, and they got a long beak, so they grab it in the tip of their beak. And what they do is they'll sit there and they'll run away from all the other fish, and then they'll chew it and swallow it down. So normally they make that first run, they run away from the other fish. You can tell. And then once they stop that first run, yep, he's still on there. Once they stop that first run, you'll feel them chomp, 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 and that's when they're swallowing it down. And I like to wait as long as I can, as long as I can stand it. And I try to watch where he's going to make sure he ain't getting me any stick ups since I'm not using a cork. I like to keep my line tight where I can feel that gar on the other end, kind of keep track of where he's at. Because if I don't keep my line tight, what's going to happen is that gar may be way over here and my line will be way over there, so whenever I go reeling my slack, it'll get around a bunch of stumps and sticks and stuff. I like to keep it just tight enough to where I can feel the fish, but I don't think he can feel me, which is what I'm doing now. All right, we're going to go for a hook set. Got the hook in him! Got the hook in him! Got the hook in him! He's got me wrapped up, but I got the hook in him. Come out of there. Come on out of there. What the heck is this? That was like a bass. It's a mudfish. Kind of felt like a mudfish. Ugly old thing. Woo! That is another reason why I prefer using live bait over cut bait, because whenever I use cut bait, a lot of times that's what I'll get, mudfish. So another tip, if you guys are mud fishing or bow fishing, you definitely want you some gloves. Both the fish have teeth. I want to show you guys this hook. So this hook, mudfish have a very bony mouth too. You see the bone and the teeth right there? Well, if you look, that hook went right in the middle of all that bone and stuff. A big hook like that's a lot harder to get in that bone. Another important tip, guys, doesn't matter what kind of fishing you're doing, if you catch a fish and your line gets frayed up, definitely need to retie. I mean, especially if you're fishing like I am and I'm fishing with monofilament, light line, I'm catching these fish with teeth. Usually I retie after every single catch, because if the line doesn't get caught by its teeth, normally it gets caught by a stick or a branch. But the one good thing about mono is it's got stretch to it. So most of the time, if that fish gets wrapped around that branch and you're using a little hook like this, you can pull him out of there. It's hot. It's hot out here. Guys, it's really hot. Did I mention to you that it's really hot outside? Heat index is probably like 105. I like to handle the bait fish, if it's alive, as least as possible, because the more you handle that bait fish, the more you wipe that slime coat off, and basically the more you're killing it. The more you get your scent on it, whether you got mosquito spray, bug spray, or whatever on your hands, and the fish can smell that. Especially garfish and mudfish, they've got really keen senses. And I'm holding this fish a lot longer than what I should be, but I had to retie. But now you guys can see that their shade has started to cast over the river. So now's the time that those gar really start coming up to the top of the water and feeding, because later in the day like this, once the shade starts cast over the river, all those bait fish and little fish that are hiding in the shade and the banks, they start coming out and roaming. So the gar start coming out and chasing. And a lot of times later in the day like this, I'll see them coming up on top of water and kaboom, getting some bait fish. Middle of the day, normally they come up, they just kind of real lazy. Bloop, 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 bloop. Now, I just seen one hit right there. I don't know if y'all can see it or not. The bubbles are still there, but I seen one hit, and I'm gonna try to throw it right on top of where he hit at. Now, another tactic I like to do is just sit there and wait until I see that big gar come up. Because you might be in a hole or a lake or wherever you're at, and you might see all these different gar coming up to the top of the water and rolling and hitting. And you know, you can tell how big they are most of the time when they come up. Sometimes you can actually see them, sometimes you can tell by their splash. Sometimes what I like to do is just sit there. If they're really active like that, I like to sit there and just wait for that big one to come up, and then I'll throw that bait right in front of them. Also, whenever they're really active like that and my bait fish has died, what I like to do is take that bait fish and hook him through the mouth and out through the top, and I'll throw him out and I'll twitch him really fast to make him dart back and forth, and those gar will come up and attack him. My bait fish has died, and what I did, I cut him in half long ways. From what I found, gar prefer bait that are long and slender, like a little shiner or a big minnow. I mean, big minnows in the river are their primary food source. So if I cut a chunk out like that and fish with it, most of the time I get a mudfish or a catfish. But if I make long cuts like this, normally I hook up with a gar. So we're gonna go ahead and take my tiny little hook here and get it in that bone real good to where it's barely in there, but at the same time, not too far to where it can come out and still get that hook in that fish. So if you find you a real hard spot in the bone that you're trying to get the hook through, what I like to do is just, once I feel it go in there, I'll start wiggling that hook and work it through there, because if you just pull it, you're gonna rip that fish open, which I just did. Whoops. Got the hook in there good enough. There we go. See if we can catch us an actual gar now and not a mudfish. But guys, if you're going gar fishing, especially in the river, that's just part of it. You're gonna catch a mudfish. There went one right there. Now I want to show you guys too about my cork. So these fish have been acting really finicky today. I had my cork like this far above my bait earlier, and I've seen several gar that come up and they wouldn't take it. They touched it, they looked at it. So I've moved my cork way on up away from it, so that way they don't get spooked by that cork. And sometimes I will even take my cork and I'll spray paint it black. And I've actually found that to help too. If they're getting finicky, they come up and they see the cork, and for whatever reason they won't take the bait, I've got a couple corks that I keep spray painted black, and that seems to help. Or even brown, either black or brown, whatever color the water is, just try to match the water. Now another reason I don't like using a cork is because it attracts the turtles. And there's a turtle around my cork. You'll see him come up in just a minute. So those turtles, they find your cork, they find your bait, they'll sit there and gnaw on it and gnaw on it and gnaw on it until they eat it all, pull it off, rob you of your bait, which is not what I want. Another advantage of me using a 7.4 rod, this longer rod allows me to make further cast. So 7.4, 7.6, your bank fishing tip, a longer rod will help you get further cast. Oh, something's playing with it, something's playing with it. Something took it under, something took it under. Alright, so my cork just went under. And you guys see I got a bunch of slack in my line that comes way out here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to reel that slack out of my line really slow and try to keep that fish from filling me, because a lot of times if he fills me, he'll let go of it. Now, by the way that he just took the cork under and the cork's just kind of sitting under, like just sitting there, makes me think it's a garfish, because a lot of times a mudfish will come grab it, take that cork, he'll go under, he'll go to the bottom. The garfish like to hang out up near the top of the water column. So a lot of times once a gar grabs your bait, if you're fishing with a cork, you'll still see that cork swimming around out there. You won't even be going under the water, and there'll be a gar on it. Alright, so I'm keeping my line tight, and he's swimming right for, there's like a dryer or something in the river right here on the bottom. I always get hung up on it. He's swimming right for it. I can tell it's a gar by the way he's chewing on it. Chew, chew, chew. So I think I've let him have it for enough time. He's like right here in front of me. Put a little bit of pressure on there and he felt me. He turned around and started going the other way. So he was going right for that hang up. Got a hook in him. Oh, got a hook in him. Come on up here, baby. Come on up here, baby. Oh yeah, it's a gar. Oh. It's a gar. Woo! So like I was saying about the long pieces of cut bait versus the square chunks of cut bait, see the gar like the long pieces of cut bait more, and I caught a mudfish with a square chunk of cut bait. Here's another tip for you guys. After you catch one of these things, if you handle them, your hands are going to get all sticky and gooey and they stink. So I recommend bring a rag with you, but if you just don't happen to have a rag, you can always just take your hands, grab you some dirt or sand, rub it together in the water, and all that grit will pull all that slime off your hands. Then you're left with clean hands, minus the coronavirus. You might catch that. Another tip I'll give you guys is always pick up your trash. Because if you don't, the fish gods will take it out on you. Call me superstitious, but leave some trash around, and then next time you go fishing, see if you catch fish. Have you guys ever ate a gar? If so, comment down below. And if you want to see me do a catch and cook with a gar, comment that down below too. And let me know what is the best way to clean them and cook them. Because last time I cleaned one, I took a hacksaw, I took a sawzall, I took one of those butcher chopper things. I spent like an hour trying to just cut him open where I could fillet him. Finally got it with like some kind of serrated knife. It was a job. But if you've got a good way, an easy way to fillet these things, get the meat out of them, please comment that down below and let me know what the best way to cook them is, and I'll do a catch and cook. But guys, if you like this video, please don't forget to subscribe, and we'll see you again next time.